Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the X's and O's with Greg Cosell. I'm Doug Farrar of Touchdown Wire and the USA Today Sports Media Group. And the gentleman over there is Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup. Greg, last week we got into your guys, some of the guys that you just enjoyed watching the most. And I thought, that was from the sublime to the ridiculous. We're not going to get into my evaluations. Six guys that I really just, I don't know how many are going to the first round or any of them. I don't know team fit. I don't know NFL success. I just really enjoyed watching their tape. So my first guy is Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver from Florida. And the first thing that really struck me about him, and I know you've seen this play, the 25-yard catch against Charlotte, where he ran that seam route against cover three, had a pretty good idea he was going to get caught between the cornerback and the safety. He made that incredible one-handed catch, and we're going to put it up. It was like the catch of the year of the NCAA. And he knew he was going to get poleaxed after the fact. And then he had a similar catch, a 33-yarder against LSU, ran a little bender up the numbers against cover three. He knew once again he was going to get caught between the corner and the safety. No problem again. He jumped up to make a great catch. And as he came down, everyone converged on him. So when we talk about competitiveness and play style, and I don't care what happens, I'm going to make this catch. It wasn't a like-as-like comparison. I saw some Amon-Ra St. Brown to his game, but as far as the competitive play style, I immediately thought Julian Edelman. And Edelman was always that guy. I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to catch the ball. So just your overall impressions before I get into my evaluation of Ricky Pearsall, what you thought of him and kind of what you think his NFL transition could look like.
Well, it's funny you say that because I saw him on Ross St. Brown as well, because what you have to remember when you do this, and none of us know what's going to happen next because there's so many variables, Doug, when you talk about these players and where they go, how they're coached, what the scheme is. Amon-Ra St. Brown, people may forget because he's been very, very good in the league, and there's a number of reasons for that, some of which, of course, is the fact that he is talented, but he's also in a phenomenal system with Detroit, with Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, and the way they space their routes, maybe better than any team in the league, and he certainly put up high-volume numbers. But people might forget he was a fourth-round pick coming out of USC. So no one saw him as an elite receiver in terms of he's a number one. Now, the volume that he's produced in the league suggests that he is that. But again, no one would be comparing him to Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, or I'm sure I'm leaving out guys, obviously. But
it's an interesting kind of philosophical construct of what is a number one receiver. I mean, everyone thinks of Jamar Chase, the 6'3", 220-pound guy who can just bang it on X ISO. That's not not every team has that, and you still need a number one receiver. So however that guy is created, you have to create that guy.
Right. Well, I mean, a perfect example would be Puka Nacua with the Rams a year ago. Catching, I believe, over 100 balls. I don't know his exact number of targets, but it was obviously a high number.
It was a lot.
So, obviously in a league where you throw the ball a lot, a receiver gets more targets than other receivers on your team. So that receiver may likely get more catches, and he may be up in the 80, 90, 100 range. And then on that particular team, he's clearly the number one receiver. But then you start getting into traits and attributes. Is he a number one receiver the way people think of a number one receiver? But anyway, that brings us to Ricky Pearsall, who a player that I really liked watching his tape as well. I thought he was one of the better route runners I saw. I thought he had a pretty refined understanding of how to use his vertical stem to attack and break down defensive backs, body fakes, head movements. Thought he really understood how to give his quarterback an indicator with his feet, with his stick, with his inside foot or his outside foot, depending on the nature of the route. Thought he had really good quickness at the top of the route stem, and that allowed him to separate. You talked about the catches that he made, so we know he has really good hands. He can catch the ball away from his frame. I thought he transitioned seamlessly to run after catch. I don't know if he'll be, despite his 40 time, I don't know if you'd say he'll be explosive vertically at the NFL level, but I don't think that's a weakness in his game because that's not really what he is.
He tested off the charts in tested off the charts in most combine drills that presage speed and explosiveness. And that's more like, what's your 10-yard split? What's your three cone? He did really well in all those.
Well, the 20-yard shuttle, the three cone was phenomenal. It was 4.05. So that, I look at that more than the 40 time, which was excellent, 4.41. But like I said, and I think you would probably agree, I don't think you look at him and say, man, this guy's just a vertical threat. This guy's just going to run by people. I don't think
Yeah,
that's what his tape shows. I'm not saying he can never be a vertical threat or a vertical dimension, obviously, based on route concepts, based on many factors, including himself. He'll get vertical, but you're not drafting him because he's a guy who's just going to run vertically.
Yeah, no, it's not like Malik Washington, who we're going to discuss in a minute. But a couple of things I wrote. Pearsall works off the snap with smooth gliding speed to get to his route bend. Very good understanding of the route tree and how to use the nuances of routes to upend coverage, which is kind of what you talked about, the indicator and the little things that make routes
Yep.
great or not. He really has a sense of that. Another thing I wrote, if your NFL team employs a lot of motion, you'll love Pearsall as a guy who can get up to full speed when moving pre-snap and get into his concepts quickly. I think that's important in most offenses today.
Yeah, and I thought he caught the ball through contact really well. So to me, he was more than just a finesse receiver. And it's funny because he's 6'1", he's not short. So he's a really interesting guy. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he's this year's version of Nakua. You never know where he goes, where he gets drafted, how it all plays out. But in a system that's really well schemed and well designed, if he gets an opportunity to be one of the top 3 receivers wherever he goes. I could see this guy being somewhat of a volume target relatively early in his career.
Yeah, a couple of things he'll have to clean up, and from what I saw, the blocking is not good. Bad matador reps. It seems like more like technique issue than a lack of willingness.
Yeah, and you know what? I've had conversations with wide receiver coaches, and even coordinators. The feeling is that we can teach that.
Right.
You're not drafting receivers based on the way they block. Is it nice if they do? Yes, but you're not. That's not why you draft receivers. That can be coached.
I remember someone asked Paul Brown I think it was the late 50s when Jim Brown was really coming up, and somebody mentioned to Paul Brown that, well, Jim Brown can't block. It's like, that's not why he's here, guys. We don't
You're right,
care.
right. I mean, there's certain things that you can definitely teach, and can be coached, and blocking for a receiver is one of those things.
Yeah, a couple more. He needs free space to operate. He'll require his NFL coaches to scheme him into that, which you discussed. Red zone efficiency will be affected until he's more consistent in getting push against tacklers. You don't expect him to be Deebo Samuel. Going back into last week's conversation about, well, what can the guy do? Don't debit him for what he can't do if that's not his frame. But he gets tackled a bit more easily than you might prefer. Other than that, he's a matchup guy. He's a really interesting player.
No, he's a really interesting player. I mean, again, he came originally from, I believe, was it Arizona or Arizona State?
Arizona State. He was
Arizona State.
Aiden Daniels, I believe, under Herm Edwards.
Yeah. No, he was a 3-star recruit initially.
Yep.
Really didn't get an opportunity to play there until his junior season, and then moved to Florida, where he caught close to 100 balls and 9 touchdowns in 2 years there.
Mm-hmm.
He was a really interesting player to watch. But my guess is that he'll be a day 2 pick. And again, now it gets down to all those variables we spoke about. Where does he go? How is he deployed? Is he going to get an opportunity to play as a rookie? But this guy can catch the football. He can contort his body. He can make tough catches. He played through contact. I think he's pretty loose-hipped. He's not stiff. I liked Ricky Pearsall's tape.
Yep. Next man up was Malik Washington, receiver from Virginia. We discussed him earlier this week, and you kind of laughed when I mentioned him, like, yeah, this guy's fun. The play we're going to put up is a 34-yard touchdown against Duke that showed just about everything Washington can do. They're in a 12-yard end cut, stiff-armed the deep safety at the 15-yard line, and outran everyone else to the end zone. And he's one of your terms, and I put it in my scouting report, he's a separation generator, copyright Greg Cosell. Great sense of how to create separation at the ball point with short area burst, subtle push-offs, and driving the defender back on vertical routes. He just knows how to get open, which is the first thing I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, I liked his tape as well. He's short, he's compactly built. I thought he had really good route quickness. I thought he was really good run after catch.
Yep.
I thought
he led all receivers in this draft class in yards after catch.
Yeah, I really like that about him a lot. And I thought his focus, his hands, he almost always made catches away from his frame. He had really elite body control to catch, to adjust and contort his body. He had great ball tracking skills. And despite his size, I thought just watching his tape, you could almost feel the mental and physical toughness in his game. He caught through
Yes.
contact. He caught in traffic when contact was clearly going to be imminent. He knew it was coming.
Oh yeah.
He made the kind of catches you would not expect to see from a 5'8.5" receiver who does not have long arms.
Yeah, 5'8.5", but 191. It's not like
No,
he's not a skinny guy. Yeah, I wrote has no issue catching the ball when defenders are converging. He's about to get whopped. He has a running back's mentality when it comes to contact.
yeah,
Uh,
and while I think there are some clear limitations to his game, the
sure.
way the NFL passing games have evolved with a much more quick game, much more motion, more stack, more bunch, more reduced splits. That's going to get him free access into routes. That'll mitigate against his smaller, shorter size, I should say. And I mean, I think another guy that I think, depending on team and scheme, could become a volume target.
Well, if you look at Lad McConkey, if you look at Pearsall, if you look at Malik Washington, it's clear with the 3x1 sets and the motion and all these different things that you just mentioned about scheming guys open. These sort of mid-size receivers are becoming more coveted in that kind of niche role.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and the thing about Washington too is, you're talking about a guy that, obviously he's not a 4.35 guy. So when you look at his height and his weight, he's not the vertical dimension that someone like Jalen Waddle is. Although their height, weight measurables are very similar. So therefore, he's not going to be a guy that's going to regulate and take the top off the defense in the same way as Waddle can. But I thought that his natural quickness and explosiveness and run after catch demands that you get the ball in this guy's hands. He was a fun watch.
Well, the after catch ability, a lot of that, from what I saw and what I wrote, understands how to make space happen in the open field. Washington will drop down from zone coverage to present an easy read in the timing of the play. Getting what Mike Martz in his playbooks used to call presenting a favorable read to the quarterback.
Yep.
He can do that. And his acceleration ensures that if you don't get him down, he'll flourish at the third level. So it's quickness. It's not burner speed, but that's not always, I mean, how many go routes do you throw in a game? It's the stuff underneath that really matters in a lot of cases.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the size thing with receivers now is becoming less important than it was years ago because of the things we mentioned.
Right.
Even weight. I mean, he's 191, but even receivers that are 170. I mean, last year we saw Jordan Addison drafted, in the first round and have a very good rookie season for Minnesota at 173. 15, 20 years ago, a receiver at 173 would never have been considered a first round pick. But with the way the game has changed, you can get these guys free access into their routes, and that's become such an important part of the game.
Well, Devontae Smith, who's 170 on a good day, just signed a major contract extension. So there you go.
There you go.
That's a pretty good. I wrote on Twitter that this is good news for the Xavier Worthy Hive because that's
well, it's probably good news for Brandon Ayuk as well, somewhere along the line.
That's boy, his agent's happy today, indeed. Yeah, but focus drop's a bit of an issue with him. He'll get ahead of himself and drop handoffs on sweeps. He dropped 2 handoffs on sweeps, which is weird. I kind of wonder if things are going too fast in his head, but for his size, you're not going to expect him to jump up and make, although Pearsall can, we'll limit him to the slot and inline of the NFL level, but he had 3 outside targets last season. But as we just discussed, that's not, it may take him out of the first round, but it doesn't mean he's not important. It doesn't mean he can't matter in a big way functionally in an offense.
Yeah, he's not going to be taken in the first round. I mean, but he was predominantly a slot receiver in Virginia's offense in 2023. Again, because he's 5'8.5", he will get pigeonholed as being he's just a slot receiver.
Right.
But now we get into the team and scheme. I mean, that's what we don't know. It's easy to say that just because he's 5'8.5", but you don't know that.
Well, I'm saying because he had 3 outside targets last year.
Yeah. So, but I'm saying you don't know how an NFL team will see him.
Sure, of course. Speaking of smaller guys who can play outside, let's switch to the other side of the ball. And Renardo Green, cornerback from Florida State, and I know you liked him too. 5'11" and 7/8", so he's just under 6 feet. 186, which is not small. That's about where, Devin Witherspoon lands size-wise, and Devin Witherspoon went 5 overall.
No, he's 6 feet tall. That's
Yeah.
pretty decent size for an NFL corner these days.
So he had 50 outside targets as opposed to 4 inside targets. And the play we want to discuss is the interception against LSU, where Green was in aggressive press against Malik Neighbors, followed him step for step upfield. Neighbors fell down. Green caught the ball and ran it back from the Florida State 25 to the LSU 23. He also deflected a fade throw from Jaden Daniels to Neighbors in that same game. Both of those were outside press targets. So when you look at a guy under 6 feet and you think, oh, slot, no, he's an outside guy.
No, he played almost exclusively outside corner in the last 2 years. I mean,
Yep.
he only played approximately 30 snaps in the slot in his last 2 years at Florida State, and they're a man-heavy scheme.
Yep.
So he played a lot of press man,
Mhm.
and I thought he showed all the needed traits to play both mirror match and physical press man. There was targeted physicality depending on how he chose to play it or the call. He played to the field, he played to the boundary. I thought he was poised. He was patient. He transitioned easily. You saw his natural quickness. At times, he looked sudden in his movement. I thought that he was also effective when he did play zone. I thought that he had a pretty good understanding of the match, carry, deliver concept.
Yes.
I thought he had an awareness of route concepts and combinations. I really liked the way he played. He was very competitive. He was very tenacious.
Oh, very.
And his approach kind of reminded me a little of L'Jarius Sneed.
I could see that. Absolutely.
And Sneed was a 4th-round pick, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
It's easy to say now that he's a top 5 corner in the league, when he just got paid, and deservedly so. But, again, when I watch these guys, I don't know how you do it, but I think about when these guys come out. You never know what's going to happen next. It's impossible to know that. But Sneed was a 4th-round pick out of Louisiana Tech and has clearly developed into one of the better corners in the NFL. And we know how ridiculously competitive Sneed is and how physical he can be. Green kind of struck me that way watching his tape.
Well, Steve had Steve Spagnuolo, who we both know, and Spags understands better than most how to maximize the attributes of his players. Well, with Green, couple things I wrote. He's a complete pain in the ass when he's pressed up on the receiver and follows to the boundary on anything vertical. He will glue himself to his guy, and he's very tough to shake. But as far as the zone stuff, I also wrote very smart in his transitions and man match. He will move foot to foot with the receiver, has a good sense of landmark switches in zone coverage. He also brings some value as a free blitzer in open space. So he's got some different stuff. He had 13 pass breakups last season. I think if you time those better and use what height he does have, there could be more interceptions. Savvier receivers at the NFL level might have him in a box to start with their foot. Green can be led the wrong way with the right look, which, if that makes sense, and that's kind of an aspect of aggressive man coverage where, that cat coverage, man wherever he goes, you can get a little waylaid by that, but it's not a huge issue. I didn't see it all the time.
Well, you got to remember one thing too, and it's true in the NFL. Guys who play a lot of man and certainly press, they're going to get beat.
Yep.
I mean, no one never gets beat. So, when I watch guys get beat, I don't know how you do it, but I try to figure out why. And so, in other words, I think to myself,
you want the context of what happened.
Correct. Is that a problem with how he plays man, or is that just, hey, guy ran a really good route, and you know what? You're going to get beat sometimes. That's the way it works. So you have to make that determination. Maybe some people make it differently than I would if they watch the same play. That I can't answer. But I try to put it in a context of, hey, you know what? You're going to get beat sometimes when you play a lot of man coverage. That's just the way of the world.
Yeah. On the other hand, you go back to the fade that he deflected from Daniels to Neighbors in LSU.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great, and your point's a good one. I mean, are guys getting beat because you don't feel they have the traits to play it at a high level? Are they getting beat because, hey, a guy just ran a really good route? Are they getting beat because you feel like they're stiff? I mean, you have to try to figure out as you watch more and more and more plays, and that's why with corners you have to watch games because you have to see them play corner when the ball's not thrown to their receiver because, if it's a pass play, they're still covering, even if the ball's not thrown to their guy.
Yeah, hopefully so. Well, you go back to the Daniels to Neighbors deflection. That's a fade ball, left side of the end zone. Daniels, to me, was the best fade thrower in this class by far. These are two guys going in the top 5, and Green had it on lock, and that's just a really impressive play. So in his case, I don't think he has any problems play. I think that was more an element of, if you're going to ask someone to play like Lester Hayes man press, which is like, I'm on your ass from snap to whistle,
Right.
and I have no help, of course you're going to get beat.
You're going to get beat. Yeah.
It's something to mention, when you're looking for like everything a guy can do. But, if you hear anything about Renardo Green, he's a little, he's not 6'2", he's not built like Richard Sherman, he's going to be a slot guy. No. He's an outside guy. He's an outside press guy.
He's going to play outside.
Any team that covets that is going to be looking at this guy like, yeah, I think so. Next guy, Matt. This is one of my personal favorites. Just watching his tape over, and just smooth, buttery smooth. Max Melton, cornerback from Rutgers. By the way, an athletic family. His father, Gary, played receiver and running back at Rutgers. His mother, Vicky, competed on the Rutgers women's basketball team. And his older brother, Bo, also played for the Scarlet Knights, was selected the 7th round of the 2022 draft by the Seahawks, and caught 18 passes last season for the Green Bay Packers. So, pretty good legacy there. 5'11", 187. The first thing that came to me, first two things: natural match and carry cornerback in any scheme, zone, man, press off, doesn't matter. Will run foot to foot with any receiver. He has a frenetic playing style, but he's able to keep it under control for the most part. I mean, I don't know how we define quote unquote wasted movement. Did he always look in phase? No, but he was able to get himself in phase in sort of the timing of the down.
Yeah, well, and that's one of those things. I thought that he had a tendency in press to take false steps at times.
Yeah.
That ideally can be cleaned up, because then when you get to the NFL, that can be a little bit of a problem depending on who you're playing against. Because when you do that, you kind of force yourself into recovery mode depending on who the receiver is. But there's no question that he's got higher level traits to play both press man, off coverage. He's a guy that's probably not as big as you would ideally like to play on the outside, but he does have experience playing in the slot. It would not surprise me if NFL teams projected him more as a slot corner.
And I think that's a good fit, because the way his playing style is, I think he has a good sense of two-way goes and option routes, and he can sort of clock into that and go.
Right. But there's no question that he's got quick feet. At times he looked very sudden in his movement. He's loose-hipped. I think he needs to clean up some of technique things, which ideally you can. That's easy to say, and it needs to be coached. And hopefully he takes to the coaching and does it. But I thought that he had some balance issues at times. As I said, he had some false steps. I thought when he was in off coverage, I thought his pedal was a little too upright. And when your pedal's upright, that negatively impacts your ability to transition and change direction. So these are all coachable things, but they need to be fixed.
One thing I wrote: recovery speed is nice, but he'll give receivers too much of a cushion at times, especially in zone, which with his athleticism, he doesn't need to do. I think that's where the false steps maybe come in. More of a man coverage expert. He'll occasionally get a bit lost in zone. Again, can be cleaned up over time. But
the thing you never know when you watch corners in particular, but it's true with a lot of different positions, is how they're coached in college.
Right.
College, they have less time. So there might be certain things he's not coached in. I had a great conversation last night with someone talking about just the idea that so many people talk about players coming into the draft definitively, like this is exactly who he is. And these guys are young players. They're going to get more coaching. They're going to have more time now. They'll become professionals. So it's far more time to be coached and to learn. These guys are not finished products. So, it just struck me when you talked about zone. We don't know how he's coached when it comes to zone coverage. We don't know the answer to that. Maybe when he's coached, he'll be great at it. We don't know that. And
also, if you're saying cover 3, well, every defense has, 16 different versions of cover 3. Your responsibilities are different. Your landmarks are different.
Correct.
We're playing 3 buzz, we're playing 3 under. We're switching from quarters to 3, so you're boxing.
No, I remember being in New Orleans a couple of years ago and chatting with Dennis Allen, and he said we have 10 versions of cover 3.
Yep.
Now, again, maybe it's not dramatic. It's obviously not going to be dramatically different. It's not, you're not reinventing the wheel with every version of cover 3, but no, you're going to be coached on all these things with different ways to see things. Your landmark might be a little different. Your initial stance might be a little different. I mean, there's all these things that we don't know about. And, this is all part of what happens when guys get to the league.
Yeah. One thing, and maybe it's because I know Richard Sherman pretty well. I like cornerbacks who can tackle against the run. That's not his thing at all, but whatever. This is, I want to get your opinion on this guy. Dadrion Taylor-Demerson, safety from Texas Tech, immediately became one of my guys. Like, the more I watched him, the more I'm like, yep. He had an interception.
What do you think he is in the NFL?
I think he's a slot safety, slot/safety. I think he can do both, but really I want him deep third because he can run. The play we're going to get into that we're going to show was the interception against Kansas. Tight end Jerry Casey ran a vertical route up the middle, and Taylor-Demerson, who was the box safety in cover 3, ran up the chute with Casey, went for what would have been a deflection for most safeties in that instance, and came down with a one-handed interception. A great example of his field speed and awareness. He's so fast that it doesn't look like he's ever in a hurry. Does that make sense? When he gets the ball, he's not in a hurry. He knows, okay, this ball, I got just as much of a shot as the receiver because I'm here in time. I know what to do. So for me, I'd probably put him most as a deep guy. Whether you're a middle of the field open or closed defense, that's where I want him most of all, because that kind of speed can be refined, but it can't really be coached. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah, I would probably agree. I think he can, probably play some post safety. The question is, can he play slot corner? He's one of those guys that did a lot in college at Tech. So when he starts his career in the NFL, and they line up on the first day of OTAs, where are they going to put him? My guess is they put him at safety.
Yeah. Well, I wrote true multi-position versatility. He can win as a slot corner, man, and blitzer, and as a single high and 2 deep safety. So he's got some good reps in slot already.
Yeah. And I think that's a question teams will have as they project and transition him to the league, is whether they see him almost exclusively as, a back end safety playing single high and 2 shell coverages, or whether they think he can also match up to wide receivers in the slot in twins and trips formations.
Sure.
That determination, I think, will go a long way in projecting his value and deployment, because you have to decide, do you think he can match wide receivers in the slot? Because then that changes kind of the way you see him. It changes the dynamic.
In man match, I think he can. And he may be a guy who gets 200 or 300 snaps his first year, and maybe his second year he comes on and you're like, whoa, where'd this guy come from? Because
no, and that could be true. He could be a special teams, situation-based player as a rookie, and then, down the road, however you see him within the context of your defense. That's why the league is so awesome and why it's so hard with some of these guys. I mean, look at somebody, not to totally get off topic, and we're not going to really do that, but look at somebody like Josh Metellus with the Minnesota Vikings now.
Right.
You never know until you see a team draft a player, where he goes, how they see him as a player, how they see him being deployed. And sometimes guys who, and that's why I had to learn that, quite frankly, Doug, particularly with defensive players, because defensive players in any given game, a defense will play 18, 19 guys on defense. And a lot of guys may only play 18 or 20 snaps or 15 snaps, but they play in specific packages, and that has major value to a defense. Those plays are important. So not everybody is going to play 60 plays as a starter, but the number of plays that a guy plays within the context of a defense in specific packages really matters.
Well, let's iterate that he has all the functional field speed you would ever want. The reason I say he might take a year, will lose his landmarks and spots and times in zone coverage. He's more a man match guy at this point, as much as he'll fool your quarterback with his speed and closing ability, because he will bait quarterbacks, man. He will jump stuff, and that'll happen in the NFL. Taylor-Demerson can be deceived right out of his socks by action and late movement. Speed covers up some transitional issues. It's impressive to watch him turn and run with a second receiver off his first assignment, which he also can do, but you're not always sure what the plan is when he gets there. From a pure physical tools perspective, he's flat out ridiculous. I take him in the late second, early third round to get the benefit of all that flash, build everything around him over time. He's got a lot of stuff you can't teach, and the rest seems coachable. So I'm not saying he's going to be the next Ed Reed. I think and the guy he reminded me of just athletically was Jalen Petre, who, came on and then came on and then came on. And you're like, okay, now I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to have to improve his tackling too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
particularly when he's playing at safety and he's coming downhill.
44 missed tackles in 5 seasons for the Red Raiders, and his style is basically getting on someone's back and waiting for the cavalry. So yeah,
he would drop his head and throw his body at the receiver a lot.
Yeah.
Poor technique, bend at the waist. Theoretically, could those things be taught? Sure, they could, but if he's been doing it his whole life, that's tough to change.
Yeah. He will need some help with that. Our final guy, Greg, is Javon Bullard, safety from Georgia. And this is a really interesting case where, obviously a top-tier defense, but his responsibilities in last season, he allowed 14 catches on 26 targets for 119 yards, 68 yards after the catch, no touchdowns, 2 picks, 5 pass breakups, and an opponent passer rating of 34.0. This in his season, Greg, where he went from primarily a box slot blitz player to an outstanding free safety and slot defender. They basically they time warped him from everything he did to all this new stuff. It's not easy to do. I mean, he's a safety. You're supposed to be able to do a lot of stuff. And Nick Saban with the 6 position guys like Minka Fitzpatrick, it's not easy to do. And they almost completely changed his responsibilities. And he just went out there and kicked ass. It was really impressive to watch.
Yeah, he's going to be a really interesting guy, by the way, in terms of, I think, how teams see him. Because I really like the player.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that he's got some physical things about him that could give some people pause.
Yeah.
Now, he might just be one of those guys that's a really, really good player, Doug, and it doesn't matter. But he doesn't have sort of the desired length you want for a DB. He's kind of even though he's not short, 5'8", 5'9", he's not like that, but he's got kind of a short, stumpy build. He almost looks more like a linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of a short strider. I mean, he's a little tight. He's more straight line linear than loose hipped. He certainly doesn't have top end speed when he has to turn and run. You wouldn't call him fluid and efficient when he really has to flip his hips to react to vertical routes.
Right.
So there's some
measurables in there: 5'10.5", 198, ran a 4.47 40 with a 1.51 10-yard split. And those are actually a high percentile for safeties, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and then you made the point in 2022 he was almost exclusively a slot corner, and in 2023 he was almost exclusively a safety. There were games in which they moved him to the slot quite a bit. They did against Missouri. They have a receiver who's really good in the slot named Luther Burden, and they moved him back to slot corner for that game. What I really liked about Bullard, and when I said he might just be a really good football player, is he has a really instinctive feel for reading the drop of the quarterback and the quarterback's eyes, and he ties that to the depth and timing of receivers' routes. That have really allowed him to play fast, to trigger, to plant on drive on throws. He did show the man-to-man matchup ability in the slot.
Yeah.
So the bottom line for me is, even though he's more straight line linear than loose and flexible, he's got really high-level football intelligence, great recognition instincts, played with a competitive and toughness that you loved. I was trying to figure out when I finished watching him how he'll be seen in the NFL. Like, what, it's funny, I mentioned Josh Metellus earlier. Like, he struck me as, if a team wanted to play that kind of defense, with a lot more, big nickel 3 safety kind of thing, that he'd really fit that beautifully.
Yeah. I got a bit of an Antoine Winfield Jr. hit off of him, but the radical change in deployment last season, 14% deep in 2022 to 83% in 2023, from 12 to 362 snaps at free safety. Didn't miss a beat. Well, a few of the things it has: the transitions, trail ability, and downfield speed to hang with quick receivers on vertical routes. Can erase receivers over the middle and in short areas. His quickness to adjust is fine. He shut down Ricky Pearsall pretty well in press slot, and press slot is really tough to play. Most slot defenders prefer to play off a little bit
Yeah.
because when you press slot, you have really no time to read the option or the two-way go. And if you take one false step, you're cooked. He has no problem with that. That was really impressive to me. You have to go back to his 2022 tape to see it, but he's a highly effective blitzer from the edge with speed off the snap and determination to get home. Sideline to sideline speed to the field, and the acceleration to close shows up over and over. And again, acceleration to close is coming down. It's different than, the back pedal turn and you can just, nuke guys 60 yards downfield. But yeah, I think that what you say about being a good football player, I take that to interpret, the testing and the height, weight, and whatever, the measurables are okay, but then you get him on the field and he just does everything.
No, he's one of those guys. But by the way, 4.47 is not a bad time.
No, it's not. It's his 40 was 79th percentile for safeties. His 10 yards.
Well, 20-yard shuttle was off the charts, so
yeah,
it was under 4.
10-yard split was 83rd percentile. So
yeah, so I mean, he's
not a stiff out there.
No, not at all. I really like the player. He's one of those guys also that grows on you because he doesn't necessarily make, those kind of impact game-changing plays. But when he comes down from the deep safety and tackles, I mean, he hits you. I think he's got the range to play post safety. I mean, even though he's kind of a short strider, he covered ground because he saw things so fast.
Well, if I'm a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and thank God in the NFL's case that I'm not, but if I were, I would want a guy who can do everything from big nickel to post to box to blitz. Yeah. He's already proven in one of the best defenses of this era in college football. He's not doing it for, Raccoon State Teachers College. He's doing it for frickin' Georgia. That as we like to say, coaches can say all they want about players. You know what they really think of them by how they're deployed on the field. They asked this guy from one season to the next in a top flight defense to do something completely radically different, and he did it. You don't see that too often at any level.
No. He's, and I think also the way in which he plays, Doug. I mean, he's a tone setter. Like, I think he brings a swagger to your defense. My guess is because it's Kirby Smart, who we know came from Nick Saban, that he's probably a pretty intelligent football player because he's been asked to do a lot of different things and he's done them well.
That's the thing. There's no way Kirby Smart would have asked him to change that much. And I don't know enough about the team to know why that happened. I know they had 26.
Well, I mean, we don't know the answer to that. It could be they didn't have another safety. It could be.
Yeah.
It could be something unrelated to Bullard. It could be they didn't have another safety they were comfortable with. We don't know the answer to that.
Right. Someone got drafted. Somebody went to the transfer portal. We don't know. But what we do know is with this guy, he could just do everything. And and not just do everything in a, Minkah Fitzpatrick sense where he played 6 different positions at Alabama. It was from one year to the next. We're going to ask you to completely change. I mean, you've been at film since 79, Greg. I don't know how many guys have ever been asked to do that at any position anywhere.
I'm sure there have been, Doug, probably more than you think. I can't think of anybody immediately off the top of my head, but this guy's a good football player.
Yep. And he can do it all. Well, Greg, as always, you can do it all. We appreciate your knowledge and wisdom and insight. And next week, oh my gosh, it'll be a draft preview because it's right around the corner.
You got your mock draft all set, Doug?
Yeah, we're gonna force you to do one. I know we couldn't possibly pay you enough money to do a mock draft.
Well, you could, but you probably can't afford it.
I don't think it's in the budget.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask you to do stuff you hate because you're very good at the stuff you like to do. So we'll do something else with that this week. We will have a video mock draft on Friday with the great Jeff Risden from DraftWire. A lot of heavy metal references, and Greg's more into yacht rock, so we don't get that here. Greg, as always, thanks for everything, and we'll talk next week.
All right, thanks, Doug.